Adrien Finlay here, Executive Director of Music Worcester, discussing with Ian Watson, who will be leading the Arcadia Players and the Worcester Chorus for Music Worcester's opening night on Friday, October 24th, here at Mechanics Hall, 8 p.m., pre-concert gala at 6 p.m. Ian, welcome.
Thank you. Good to be here.
So we have so much floating around opening night, but I think I would probably start with the obvious question. Have you conducted the ninth before?
I have never conducted the ninth before. I have to be honest, but there has to be a first time, and it's obviously it's a huge challenge for any conductor. I mean, it's a dream, in fact, of most conductors to be able to conduct the ninth. I'm so delighted to be able to do it with the Worcester Chorus in such a great hall, and with my own orchestra. Yeah. One of the interesting things about this performance, of course, we're using period instruments, which is not so often done, but it's basically the way that Beethoven would have heard the piece, had he been able to hear it. It was certainly what he would have expected to hear. And I think that the benefits of the instruments we use are the great clarity and sort of fleetness which one can achieve. Very, very different sound.
So Beethoven's ninth, it has, unto itself, it had so much floating around it in turn, politics, a very popular piece, a piece that, so many choruses just love to dig into.
Yeah.
How on earth do you approach, especially conducting it for the first time, something that is just such a loaded topic, a loaded piece? Do you start with your own listening? Do you start very purist with the score and shut out all sound? How do you start?
Yeah, I generally speaking, with anything I perform, I tend not to listen to recordings. I mean, it's obviously difficult not to. Most of the people could sing parts of the Ninth Symphony. I think the so-called Ode to Joy is a hymn, of course, that well-known melody. But there's a lot more to it than just that. I think the thing to do for me is to study the score and to try to identify the climaxes or the places for which one should be heading, kind of milestones along the way, which for a piece like the Ninth, which is it has its flaws, in my opinion, and it is a slightly sprawling in some ways. And I think it's necessary to find the milestones, the signposts, the high points. And really, perhaps one point which is higher than all the others, because otherwise one keeps on reaching the same height throughout. A
bit of a bombardment.
So I tend to perhaps verify that view with some recordings, either one way or the other. But it's something which personally I try to work out for myself. Yeah.
Now you mentioned period instruments, and I know that there's a whole when it comes to that phrase, there's a whole range of options. Some use certain types of bow on modern instruments, some go all the way. What, if we might pinpoint, say your violin section, what actually will they be holding in their hands?
Well, this is a very interesting point, actually, and it's a huge subject. The whole subject of, as it were, historically informed performance, which is a phrase I totally loathe,
quote
personally.
Unquote, yes.
But in many ways, from my point of view, authenticity is not about following the points made in a treatise by somebody many years ago. In fact, in many of those treatises, it's very, very dogmatic. And then at the end, it'll say, well, actually, do what you like. So I think that there's that element to it also. But as far as this particular project is concerned, we tend to use instruments which are set up in a particular time frame. Which is actually not authentic in some ways, of course, because at the time people would have had violins used by their granddad, which weren't set up between 1815 and 1826 at all. But we try to do that. the gut strings is something that people often focus on with stringed instruments, but even that isn't so outlandish. Heifetz played on gut strings.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah. Oh. So what's so great about that? There's not anything particularly Beethovenian about playing on gut strings. And certainly in Brahms' time too, of course. I mean, I think that metal strings are something which only really came in at the beginning of the 20th century. Metal wound strings, yeah. So it's mainly actually in the bow, I would say. We use what they call a transitional bow, which Beethoven himself favored a heavier bow. He wanted more, so you can get more sound out of the instrument. Yeah. But the bridge is still low on the violin. And there's less tension. We played a lower pitch. We played A430 instead of A440, which is a more relaxed. The whole thing is more relaxed. And of course, the element of vibrato, which is again a 20th century invention, continuous vibrato. It may interest you to know that the cellist, for example, who played the Brahms double, the first performance, did not use an end pin in his cello. He held it between his knees in the old style. So we tend to think of these stringed instruments as being a particular way, but So as far as the violin section goes, I'd say yes, gut strings, a lower bridge, lower tension. Not a modern bow, but what they call a transitional bow, which is somewhere between a modern bow and has a straighter stick. The modern bow has a concave stick, as it were, to aid a more even pressure throughout the length of the bow. A Baroque bow is convex, which gives a greater contact with the string, actually. And the transitional is sort of in between the two.
Well, this will be great. Beethoven's Ninth, perhaps as our audiences haven't heard it before.
Oh, definitely.
Excellent. So also on the program, I would be remiss if I didn't also say and ask you about the concerto, because you will both be conducting as well as performing as a soloist. Yeah. So the triple concerto.
Yes.
And you and I would imagine some of your most favored colleagues will be featured.
That's correct.
And what instrument will you be playing for that?
I'll be playing a forte piano for that. And again, that's going to be a very, very different instrument to the one that most people hear this piece played, or even Beethoven concerti. It's really modeled on an 1803 instrument, which Beethoven would definitely have recognized. And I think it's so interesting that in the same way that the modern bow used these days, the keyboard equivalent of that, the modern piano, which is, again, designed to be even throughout its range. The forte piano is not even throughout its range. It has a lot of color. The bottom rattles, the middle is kind of solid, and the top is very tinkly. And it's all wood framed and much, much smaller than one might think. One thinks of Beethoven playing the Emperor Concerto on a huge piano. Right. It wasn't actually. It was about the size of this table, which is interesting concept.
Now, to conduct from the piano when you are not the only soloist, how's that going to work?
That's going to be a novel one, isn't it? Yeah.
How will you position the violin and the cello?
Well, I'm thinking I'm going to be facing the orchestra with the lid off and have perhaps the violin and cello on either side. The way that they think classical concertos were directed, however, is with believe it or not, with the soloist. For example, in a Mozart concerto, Mozart might well have been sitting with his back to the woodwind, looking out at the audience. One reason for that is that the way this piano is designed, the strings are actually straight, and most of the sound actually comes out of the pointed end unlike a modern piano where it comes very, very concentratedly out of the pointed end.
And in that situation, the concertmaster becomes all important.
Right. So in fact, the end of the piano would be rather close to the concertmaster. And so this sort of music is really expanded chamber music. I think this is probably a bit of a stretch, but there comes a point where a conductor is necessary.
Yes.
Thank goodness. But it's certainly prior to that. Mozart concerti are just expanded chamber music. You don't really need a conductor for it.
Well, Ian, we are certainly looking forward to you, Arcadia Players, the Worcester Chorus.
Thank you.
Again, Friday, October 24th, 8 p.m., pre-concert gala at 6 p.m. All details and tickets available at musicworcester.org.